teach us. Pray that you be with him today and just be with us to try to hear what you're telling us and try to apply it in our lives. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your son who came and gave himself for us. And just help us to follow him in every way. Bless these things in Jesus' name.
Amen. Well, I'm not going to ask a show of hands, but I'm hoping that after our little video last week that everyone went home and reread Esther. A lot of good stuff in that book, and we're not going to have a lot of time. We just got today to kind of finish it, and so I think everyone knows pretty much how everything went there, but we do want to talk about it a little bit. When did these events take place? When did the events in Esther take place? Well, it starts out there in the 3rd year of King Ahasuerus, who is also known as Xerxes I, and he reigned in Persia from 485 to 465 BC. He was there for 20 years, and so this started out in the 3rd year, although most of the events that took place a few years after that. If you take a look, I think in Esther, let me find it real quick. There in chapter 2, verse 16, when Esther was taken to the king, this is after she had been selected, and as one of the young ladies, but that happened in the 7th year of the king's reign. So there was some time passed between the beginning of the book and when this happened. So. And that time passage we don't account for very often. We just read from one paragraph to the next or one chapter to the next. But if you take a look at the history, the events in Esther actually occurred. You remember back in Ezra, I think it's like first 6 chapters of Ezra, and then there's about a 60-year break, and then we start chapter 7 and the rest of Ezra. Well, this falls in that break time between the 6th chapter of Ezra and the 7th chapter of Ezra. So this is the time for King Ahasuerus, and then Artaxerxes, who is prominent in the rest of Ezra and in Nehemiah, followed Ahasuerus, and Artaxerxes was king from 465 BC to 424 BC. So just kind of the time frame of when these things took place. Once again, I think everyone has looked at hopefully Esther and read it, and I think that little video synopsis we had last week was a pretty good way to start that. So what I want to talk about today is the characters in the story and what kind of lessons we can get from each of them. We have King Ahasuerus, Queen Vashti, Mordecai, Esther, and Haman. I didn't intend to put him on a separate page, but he was certainly a unique individual. So let's just talk about the lessons that we might learn from those individuals, talking about those individuals and the things that they did. And I'll start. King Ahasuerus seemed like he drank a lot. All right? I don't know if, I won't ask for a show of hands, but anyone ever know of someone who made bad decisions when they were drunk? Yeah, pretty much everybody in here can either know somebody personally or may have been impacted by someone.
Any good decisions while they were drunk.
Yeah, were there any good decisions made in that case? And you know, sometimes well, I'm going to relate this story to you. I'll only take a minute. Bad things that happen when people get intoxicated. In 1984, there was a salesman on November 19th that finished up his day early and sat in a tavern and drank and drank and drank for a while. And when he left the tavern, it wasn't an interstate highway, it was a divided highway that he got on. He got on going the wrong direction on that divided highway, and he collided head on with a young couple that were going out to dinner. All three of them died. That young lady in that accident was my younger sister. So that man's drunkenness directly impacted my family for the rest of especially the rest of my mother's life. So that's the first thing I thought of when I thought about, I'm talking about the lessons that we can learn from some of these people. So Ahasuerus seemed to like to drink a lot, and he made some pretty bad decisions when he did. What else? Who else can give me something that they can relate with Ahasuerus?
I think he was kind of proud of himself. He displayed all the things to prove how wealthy he was.
How great he was, and what's an example of that? How did that manifest itself? We start out there early on with him having a party that went for 180 days. Okay? And then he had a party, that was just for the I had a friend at work that always talked about the bosses as the large hair pieces, all right? I don't know why he came up with that moniker, but that's what he said, you know. So anyway, Ahasuerus had all the princes and all the royalty there for that long party, and then he had another one for a couple of days just for everybody in Persia. All right, wanting everybody to see how great it was, or how great a king he was, and how splendid things were. And so, yeah, that's kind of what he seemed to be about, wasn't it?
Well, Terry, that name, Ahasuerus, was a common name they give to a king. And that name meant great. It meant chief. It was designed to blow up your head and make you feel important. And there was a lot of kings named that. But,
Yep.
so he was probably pretty proud of that name.
Probably. Once again, history calls him Xerxes the First. Ahasuerus is his biblical name. But, yeah.
He was a very strong king. I don't think he was a very strong king. He was easily influenceable by people that probably shouldn't have been influenced by. You know, with Vashti, he had people tell him to go ahead and put her away for what she said, and so he did that. Then with Haman, Haman convinced him that all Jews should die because they didn't look at him, as some part of the royal throne, and even to an extent, Esther was able to influence him in reversing that decree that they had made earlier. So I think he was easily influenced as a king. He wasn't I wouldn't see him as a strong military leader. I wouldn't see him as a strong personality. He didn't think for himself.
Yeah, we've got some good examples of that. We also probably have some current examples of that type of leadership, but we won't go there today. So yeah, it didn't take much for that. What did I miss?
I wasn't quite going there. But that's okay. I mean, you could apply it. So.
Yeah, we're looking for lessons that we can apply today. That's probably not a good one. But yeah, he was seemed to be easily influenced, and he certainly was easily influenced when he'd been drinking, which seemed to be often. All right. Well, how about his queen, Queen Vashti? What can we say about her?
She doesn't suffer fools. She doesn't suffer fools.
Okay. She probably wasn't a worshiper of Jehovah God, but she also wasn't going to parade around in front of these guys. In front of, you know, he wanted everyone to see how beautiful she was. And a commentary that I have says that the way it was worded, that she was to appear in her crown. Period. The writer thought that he was asking her to appear naked in front of these people, just wearing her crown, so he could show her off. And she wasn't having any of it. All right? She said no. It's hard to say no to a king that holds your life in his hands. All right? So whether she was, and once again, I don't think there's any evidence that she was motivated by God, but she was not. She was a modest person, and she wasn't going to participate in that. She suffered for it. All right. So, as was just pointed out, you know, King Ahasuerus, once again, instead of making a decision, he went to his senior people, his guidance, those people that he had there in his council to advise him, and they advised him, oh, you got to put her away, and then they write a declaration because they're thinking, well, we don't want the women in our kingdom to start thinking like her, that they can tell us yes or no. And so he actually wrote a proclamation that the men were in charge of the family. All right, so she was basically banished. It doesn't say what actually became of her, but she was tossed out, never to come back into that palace again. And I suppose she probably knew that was a possibility and maybe even a likelihood going into it. So, but once again, an example of a modest woman. All right. Who else do we have? Well, we have Mordecai. What do we know about Mordecai?
He's a Jew.
Right?
He's the cousin of Esther Ali.
Right? Yeah. His Mordecai's uncle was her daughter. Was his uncle's daughter was Esther, and so Mordecai apparently took very seriously the responsibility that he had of watching over Esther, and helping take care of her and advising her, providing her counsel. What did Mordecai do that aggravated Haman?
What he didn't do.
He exposed the assassination.
I beg your pardon?
He exposed the assassination.
Well, he exposed the assassination that was plotted against the king. Yeah, that's what I was getting. That's the point I was getting to. The King Ahasuerus, made Haman like the number 2 man in the kingdom. You know, everybody was supposed to. He was above all the other princes. He was the number 2 person there. And we'll talk. We got plenty of fodder for talking about Haman here in a bit. But Mordecai wouldn't bow down to him. Doesn't say exactly why. I mean, because it wasn't especially unusual for a Jew to bow down to the leader of the nation. But he wasn't going to do this for Haman. Haman was an, what's the word, Agagite? And, beg your pardon?
Bad news, kind of bad news for the Jews.
Okay, there was some bad blood there as well. So we're not sure exactly why Mordecai wouldn't honor or respect him, but he just wasn't. He wasn't going to do it. And he may have thought that was an affront to God, and that certainly was where his allegiance lay, and he wasn't going to do it. So, but going back, he did reveal an assassination plot to the king, actually he revealed it to Esther, and she took it to the king and attributed it to Mordecai. And they investigated it and found out, sure enough, these people were planning to assassinate the king. So he saved the king's life in that plot. And they were, those two, it talks about two people. There may have been more involved, it doesn't say. And those individuals were executed. What's the other thing that happened there? That was all recorded, right? Those things that happen in the kingdom, someone there, a scribe of some sort, kept records, wrote these things down. And that comes into play significantly later on. So not only did it happen, but it was written in the book of Chronicles in the king's presence, there in chapter 2, verse 23. Okay. So once again, though, Mordecai was dedicated to his Jewish brethren. He's dedicated to God. And I don't know, maybe some lessons that we can learn from him as we go through, we'll think of.
You know, I got one interesting thing here, Terry. I had not realized this, but this commentary has a note here that Esther is the only book in the Bible that does not mention God's name.
Not one time.
That's interesting.
I think there's 167 verses or something like that, and God is not mentioned anywhere in there. However, you can obviously see God's providence all through this. All right? I mean, with just what we're talking about, Mordecai overhearing these guys plotting an assassination for the king. I don't know what the odds would be that he just accidentally happened to be sitting where he could hear that. All right, I think we got to believe God's providence is in here many, many, many times. All right. So, let's talk about Haman some. Haman was the number 2 guy in the kingdom. Could have pretty much anything he wanted. I think it's...
He was not nearly as helpful as Joseph was when he was the second man in the kingdom.
No, he wasn't helpful at all, was he? Now, he was all about, I don't know, egotistical narcissist. Does that kind of fit? I think I'm looking at the right definitions of those words when I talk about him. I mean, here's one guy in the whole Persian kingdom, and he becomes obsessed with him. I mean, this turns out to be his downfall. But this one guy has got him so wrapped around the axle that he just can't talk about anything. He goes home and he complains to his family about it. What did they advise him to do? What did the family tell him? What was that, Mike?
She said,
Kill him.
To kill him. Yeah, they said, build a gallows, and once again we talked about. We're thinking this is not necessarily a gallows like we believe. What we see in this country, out the old Western kind of gallows, but just a big stake for Mordecai to be impaled on. But they advised him to do that. Well, kill him. Take care of it. But he was so engrossed in this one individual. He had everything he wanted. He could have anything in the kingdom. But his focus was not on all the good things, but just on this one guy, this irritant that just he couldn't get around.
You know, you said that Mordecai was also related to Esther, but he also adopted her because she was an orphan
Right. Her parents were both deceased.
before she became king. I mean,
Queen?
Yeah. Critical perspective.
Yeah. So, you're right, Jim. And he was, once again, he was her,
He was her stepfather, I guess.
well, yeah, I don't know how you would put it, adopt. I don't know if she was probably not formally adopted, but anyway, he had taken it upon himself to see to her best interests. All right. So, Haman is just so focused on Mordecai that, well, he comes up with this plot that Chad talked about earlier, that he went to the king, and it doesn't, if I remember reading this, I don't think he ever actually says that, I don't think he told the king necessarily that he was wanting to destroy the Jews, but perhaps he did, because he knew Mordecai was a Jew, and he said, well, we'll just kill all of them. We'll get rid of all of them, and that way I won't have this guy to be pestering me to be focused on. And as we talked earlier, Ahasuerus said, "Yeah, sure, let's do that. That sounds good." Gave him permission to, and so how did they decide when that was going to happen? Cast lots. Was it Pur? That is, the lot was cast from before Haman from day to day and month to month, and so they determined out when this was going to be. It's called the 13th of Adar, which was several months off, and so that was when the Jews were going to be all annihilated. He was going to kill all of them. So what happened there? What did Mordecai and Esther do? Well, they had to do something, right? They had to, or they felt that they had to do something. Mordecai actually says, and he's wanting Esther to go to the king about this. Why was she hesitant?
She was a Jew and they wanted to kill all the Jews.
Well, they wanted to kill all the Jews, but the king didn't know she was a Jew.
Well, I mean, she saw it happen to Vashti when she defied the king in one way or the other. I think there's probably plenty of examples up to that point of queens who had been maybe not just put away, but put to death if they were to somehow defy a king's order.
You weren't allowed to enter the presence of the king unless he called for you. And she said, I haven't been called to see him for 30 days. And he says, well, you're just going to have to go in there. And she says, well, if he doesn't hold his scepter out to me, my head's going to get cut off. And Mordecai says, you're the only one. You're going to have to be courageous and go do it. And what we know from secular history is she had good reason to be afraid because he was crazy. He was crazy. Like the way he treated his troops in battle, like he was nuts. So she had a good reason to be scared to death of this guy. So, but she does it because Mordecai's like, look, if it's not you, it's going to be somebody else, and you're just going to die anyway. So.
Yeah. So, and she was right, and you're exactly correct, that if you approach the king without him asking you to come to him, and as far as the law of the Medes and the Persians, that was a death sentence. They just take you out and execute you. And she knew that was a possibility. She was concerned about that. she didn't really want to.
I think we gotta remember, and, you know, I actually heard a commentary, and I don't think that somebody was really disappointed that Esther had to be convinced to go in front of them. I actually heard and we gotta understand, Esther wasn't real old this time either. Yeah, and so there's a hesitation there naturally that I think any teenage girl would have about, you know, laying her life on the line at that time.
Absolutely. And this was not just this wasn't an idle threat, you know, something in someone's imagination. As Shelley pointed out, this guy was nuts or drunk, maybe both. And so anything that irritated him certainly could end up as a problem. Now, what does Mordecai say to her that kind of helps push this forward?
I think the faith that Mordecai shows in God is I mean, especially during this time period. You know, we've got the Israelites have been banished. They're in a different land, but Mordecai still understands the fact that, hey, whatever happens, I think the Jews are going to be okay. And it's just, you know, you never can tell. This might be why you were placed in this position.
That's exactly the quote that I wanted you to bring up there, buddy. It's there in the chapter 4, verse 14. I'll read the whole verse. If you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And then he goes on to say, and who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this? He's saying God's providence could easily have put you here for this very purpose.
And he's right.
Absolutely.
He's right. That's exactly what's happening here.
Absolutely. And then she goes on to and this was the words that were related to her. This was not a face-to-face talk. And then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens also will fast in the same way, and thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law, but if I perish, I perish. All right? So she wanted fasting and prayers to help strengthen her and to ask for God's help in this, but she acknowledged that, well, if I die, I die. And someone else will have to rescue him. So Mordecai then went away and did just as Esther had commanded him. So this was their plot to dissuade the king from this thing, and ultimately it worked. It did work. When she went into the king, he saw the queen there standing in court. She obtained favor in his sight, and he extended to Esther that golden scepter, which was in his hand. And she came to him, and he said, there in verse 3 of chapter 5, what's troubling you, Queen Esther, and what is your request? Even to half the kingdom it shall be given to you. So she was very beloved in his sight, apparently. And so what does she ask for?
Come have dinner with her.
Come, I'm going to have dinner for you. You and Haman, bring him with you. We'll have a banquet at my house, and I'll prepare that banquet for you tomorrow, and I will do what the king asks.
Make sure you bring Haman.
So Haman knows that he's been asked to go to this banquet. Says he went out that day glad and pleased of heart. But then what happened? What changed his mood?
Mordecai
what always has changed his mood here? He ran into Mordecai. Oh, man. And so Haman was filled with anger against Mordecai, but he controlled himself. However, went to his house and sent for his friends and his wife and recounted to them the glory of his riches and the number of sons and all that. And he said, even Esther the queen, let no one but me come with the king to the banquet she had prepared. So tomorrow also I'm invited by her with the king. And all that good stuff happening to him. And he what's the verse? Verse 13 says, yet all of this does not satisfy me every time I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. He had all that going for him, but he just couldn't let that one guy just couldn't get away from it. And that's when he had the gallows built, the 50 cubits high, which is 75 feet, give or take. So, I don't know, maybe King Ahasuerus this day wasn't drinking much because he had trouble sleeping that night. Someone relate the rest of that episode. He couldn't sleep. What did he do?
He had the history books brought in.
Yeah, boy, that'll put you to sleep. He had someone come in and read him the Chronicles there. And what did he learn? What had he forgotten? Well, he forgot that Mordecai had saved his life. I mean, he probably wasn't all that involved in all the details of that attempted assassination years back, but he had forgotten about it. And learned that as these guys reading this history about Mordecai saving the king's life. And yet nothing had ever, he says, what honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this? And the king's servant who attended it said, nothing. Nothing's been done for him. We haven't done anything for him. So the king wants to do something for Mordecai. About this time, Haman walks in and just came into the court, and the king's servants told him that Haman was there. And so the king's got Mordecai on his mind, all right? And he says to Haman, what is to be done for the man who the king desires to honor? Who did Haman think this was? He thought it was him. He'd been invited to the queen's banquet, and now the king's going to honor him? It didn't work out, did it? He says, so Haman gives him, for the man who the king desires to honor, let him bring a royal robe which the king has worn, and the horse on which the king is ridden, and on whose head a royal crown has been placed. And let the robe and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble princes, and let them array the man who the king desires to honor, and lead him on horseback through the city square, and proclaim before him, thus it shall be done to the man whom the king desires to honor. So Haman comes up with this, you should put that guy on a horse that it's yours, and put your robe on him and a crown, and have one of your princes take him around the city and honor him in front of everybody. What did Ahasuerus say? Cool. Yeah, let's do that. That's for you do that for Mordecai, because Mordecai's the guy I want to honor. Popped his balloon.
Especially because at the end of chapter 5, then the very next morning, he was going to go to ask the king if he could kill Mordecai.
Well, that's what he was going to see the king about.
So now he's going, I guess I can't.
Yeah, we'll pocket that little item for a while. And, So not only did he I guess was smart enough not to go ahead and ask, but so not only did he not get to kill Mordecai, he had to be humiliated by walking around and leading him around on a horse so that everybody can see how pleased the king is with him.
And again, you can see the providence of God there, because what are the odds that he's not gonna be able to sleep that night? And what are the odds he's gonna hear that exact story? Like, you can just, like I said, you can't, his name's not in the book, but he's all over the book.
Right, exactly. And I'm going to run out. I got a couple minutes here yet. So Esther then she had them over for dinner. They came back a second time. And then she said there in chapter 7, verse 3, "If I found a favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given to me as my petition and my people as my request. For we've been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated." Now, if we had only been sold as slaves, men and women, I would have remained silent, for the trouble would not have been commensurate with the annoyance to the king. She's telling him, I wouldn't even have bothered you if we were just going to be slaves. But the plan is for us all to be killed. And Ahasuerus asked Queen Esther, who is he and where is he who would presume to do this? Once again, remember, he was probably drunk when he did it. Doesn't remember. Who's going to do this? Esther says, a foe and an enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman became terrified before the king and queen. Now the king is so mad, he's ready to bite nails. He gets up and walks off. We got 5 minutes to finish. He gets up and walks off. So what's Haman doing? He is begging. Begging.
He crosses a huge boundary in the ancient world. He dares to touch the king's woman.
Yeah. And so just as that time he's there trying to, convince her, what happened? King walks in. This doesn't look good for Haman at all, does it?
Well, that was a death sentence in and of itself. Without even having the other stuff on top of it, he did not touch any of the king's women at all.
So the king rose in his anger. He goes back went out to the palace garden for a while, but Haman stayed in there to beg for his life. The king returned from the garden into the place where they were drinking wine, and Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. And the king says, will he even assault the queen with me in the house? And what happened? Instantly. What did the servants do?
Put a bag over his head.
They covered his head because the king didn't want to look upon anybody's face that was to be a condemned man. So they immediately knew what was coming, and they covered his head. Now, you kind of get a feeling that the queen's servants and the king's people kind of liked Esther. Because what's the first suggestion? Yeah, hey, he says, and he gives the gentleman's name, one of the eunuchs. He said, behold, indeed, the gallows standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high, cubits high, not cubics, cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on behalf of the king. And the king said, hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows. Once again, historically, it was probably he just was impaled on that stake. Either way, not good. And the king's anger subsided. So that was the demise of Haman. And I guess some of the lessons we can learn is that, sometimes we get focused on one little bad thing, one little thing that somebody's done to irritate you, and completely lose sight. I mean, just blow it way, way out of proportion and completely lose sight of all the good stuff in our lives. And this is, once again, this is a great, great read. And just looking at these individuals, were they perfect? Were Haman and Esther perfect? no assertion that that's the case at all. But God used them to get what He needed and get the Jews freed and keep them from suffering and dying. So the providence of God is seen once again, as Jim pointed out earlier. God is not mentioned in here anywhere, not a single time. But His presence is from one end of this book to the other. And it's just if you haven't sat and if you didn't sit down and read it, please do so. It's just a great read. But real quickly, I've got a couple minutes. The Jews still had the problem, right? Because once the king makes a declaration, it's written in stone. It's going to happen. So they went into him and pled with him, and so they came up with a plan. Said they can fight back. Okay, you can fight back. And apparently there were many of the Persians that stepped in to help them as well. And the Jews destroyed their enemies on that day, the 13th of Adar. And I'll stop here. But anyway, that was they were saved from that edict. And No, they didn't take anything. That's a good point, Dolores. They didn't take anything. They killed these people, but they didn't take their possessions. All they wanted was just to be safe. All right, thank you very much.